In the modern world, mindfulness has become a household term. From meditation apps and self-help books to therapy sessions and corporate workshops, it is praised as the ultimate tool for mental clarity, emotional balance, and personal growth. But in this rapid rise in popularity, something subtle yet vital has been lost. The word mindfulness has been stretched, repurposed, and redefined in ways that often blur, distort, or even contradict its original spiritual significance. It is now widely understood as paying attention to everything, being fully present in the moment, or noticing whatever arises. While these definitions are not entirely wrong, they are dangerously incomplete, and in the context of the Buddha's original teachings, they miss the heart of what mindfulness truly is. In early Buddhist texts preserved in the Pāli Canon, the word translated as mindfulness is sati, a term far richer, deeper, and more nuanced than any single English word can express. Sati is not simply noticing or being aware of what's happening around you. It is not a passive awareness of random thoughts, sensations, or external stimuli, nor is it a multitasking of the senses, trying to pay attention to everything at once. Rather, sati is a wise, selective, and purposeful presence. It is an awakening to what truly matters in the moment. It is a mental quality rooted in remembrance, clarity, and discernment, a quality that supports the unfolding of wisdom, rather than merely increasing sensory awareness. Consider for a moment the absurdity of trying to pay attention to everything. The mind simply cannot do that. Attention is a limited resource. The more we attempt to distribute it across every sound, every feeling, every passing thought, the more we dilute its power. Attention without direction becomes distraction. This is not mindfulness. It is mental restlessness wearing a robe of spirituality. True mindfulness, as taught by the Buddha, is not about becoming more alert to everything that arises. It is about becoming more awake to the patterns that bind us, the truths that liberate us, and the path that leads out of suffering. Imagine you are walking through a dense forest. All around you are trees, birds, sounds, insects, sunlight, wind, and countless details. If you tried to notice all of them equally, you would become overwhelmed, lost, and mentally fatigued. But suppose you are walking with a deeper purpose, to find a path, to locate a specific landmark, or to return to your original trail. Your attention will naturally filter out what is irrelevant and sharpen toward what matters most. You are aware, but not of everything. You are focused, not in a narrow way, but in a wise and intentional way. This is much closer to what sati is. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness as a wellness technique or as a strategy for workplace productivity. He taught it as a component of the Eightfold Path, embedded within a system of liberation. Sati is one limb of this path, and it supports the entire structure by keeping the mind tethered to the present in a way that reveals the nature of reality. This is key. Mindfulness, in the Buddhist sense, is always in service of seeing clearly. It is never mindfulness for its own sake. It is mindfulness that leads to insight. It is mindfulness paired with clear comprehension. And it is mindfulness anchored in ethical discipline and supported by mental stillness. This lecture is an invitation to return to the roots of mindfulness, not as an academic study, but as a living practice. We will examine what sati actually means in the Pāli Canon. We will explore the common misconceptions that surround it in contemporary culture. We will look at how mindfulness functions within the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, and how it serves as a gateway to wisdom and freedom. We will also reflect on the difference between awareness and awakened awareness, between indiscriminate attention and selective clarity, between being mentally present and being truly inwardly awake. The core idea we will return to again and again is this. Mindfulness is not about paying attention to everything. It is about being awake to what is. And what is refers not just to what is happening, but to what is true, relevant, liberating. The Buddha was not asking us to become passive observers of every breath and sound and itch. He was calling us to wake up to the dynamics of suffering, craving, impermanence, and selflessness that operate beneath the surface of our ordinary experience. To understand mindfulness in this light is to shift from effortful noticing to effortless clarity. It is to trade anxiety about missing something for the peace of knowing, I am here. and I am awake to what this moment reveals. This is not detachment. It is engagement at the deepest level. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is radical honesty with the reality of our minds. This is not New Age awareness. It is ancient, tested, and rooted in wisdom older than memory. In the sections that follow, we will walk carefully through the terrain of true mindfulness. We will distinguish between what is commonly taught today and what was transmitted over centuries in the oral and written traditions of Theravada Buddhism. We will ask hard questions. What are we really paying attention to? Why are we attending to it? What are the consequences of our attention? And most of all, how can we live in a way that aligns attention with awakening? To begin, we must clear the ground. We must unlearn some of what we've picked up through popular mindfulness culture. We must let go of the myth that mindfulness means scanning everything, noticing everything, accepting everything. Mindfulness is not a sponge that absorbs the world. It is a light that illuminates what is real. It is not a radar system. It is a compass. And once we learn to hold it properly, it will not show us everything. It will show us the way. In the age of mass communication and commodified spirituality, the concept of mindfulness has undergone a subtle but profound transformation. What once was a specific, deeply rooted mental quality in the Buddha's path to liberation has now become a catch-all term for any kind of attention or awareness. In mindfulness workshops, meditation apps, therapy sessions, and yoga studios across the globe, people are taught that mindfulness simply means being aware of the present moment, noticing thoughts without judgment, or paying attention to everything around you. This modern framing, while not entirely incorrect, is dangerously superficial. It dilutes the purpose and direction of mindfulness until the practice becomes more about comfort than clarity, more about coping than awakening. And most crucially, it obscures the fact that not all forms of attention are beneficial, and not all awareness leads to freedom. One of the most widespread misconceptions is the belief that mindfulness is about expanding attention to include everything that arises, every sound, sensation, thought, and emotion, without filtering or discrimination. Practitioners are often encouraged to just notice, to be present with whatever comes up, and to accept all experience as equally valid. While there is a surface-level truth to this attitude, it fosters non-reactivity and cultivates calm. It also contains a hidden danger. If we become observers of everything without discerning what is skillful and what is unskillful, what leads to suffering and what leads to freedom, then our mindfulness remains shallow. We end up swimming on the surface of the mind without ever diving into its depths. In early Buddhism, the Buddha made it clear that attention is not a neutral force. It can be right or wrong, wise or unwise. In Pali, this distinction is drawn through the term manasikara, which means mental attention or application. And within this framework, there is a crucial concept called yoniso manasikara, wise attention. Wise attention is the key that opens the path to insight. It is the kind of attention that looks deeply into causes and conditions, that sees impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. It is what leads to dispassion, to the cooling of craving, and ultimately to the cessation of suffering. In contrast, ayoniso manasikara, unwise attention, leads to entanglement, delusion, and more suffering. The Buddha did not advocate for us to pay attention to everything indiscriminately. He invited us to pay wise attention to what matters for liberation. This is a radical departure from the popular view. If all attention were equal, if mindfulness simply meant to observe without discernment, then the Buddha's teachings would have no direction. But the Dhamma is not aimless. It is a path with a goal, a destination, and a method. The very term, right mindfulness, in the Noble Eightfold Path implies that there can also be wrong mindfulness. Not all awareness is liberating. A sniper has high levels of concentration and present moment awareness, but that is not Sati. A thief creeping through the night is highly mindful of every sound, but that is not Samasati. Mindfulness, in its Buddhist sense, must be framed within ethical context and directed toward wisdom. Another common misunderstanding is that mindfulness is a passive act of watching thoughts float by, like clouds drifting across the sky. This imagery is poetic and in the early stages of practice. It can help reduce reactivity. But if we stop there, if mindfulness becomes only a passive stance of observation, we miss its full power. Mindfulness, as practiced in the Buddhist tradition, is not passive. It is alert, investigative, engaged. It looks at the mind not just to see what arises, but to understand why it arises. It does not merely observe suffering. It seeks its origin, its structure, and its cessation. Furthermore, the modern fixation on external stimuli, sounds, tastes, sights, bodily sensations, often distracts from the true terrain of mindfulness, the inner world of the mind. In the Satipatthāna Sutta, the Buddha does not say, "Be mindful of everything happening around you." He teaches us to be mindful of the body, feelings, mind states, and mental phenomena, not to become more outwardly alert, but to turn inward with clarity and precision. This is where transformation happens, not in noticing a bird's song or a leaf falling to the ground, but in noticing the arising of greed, the flicker of irritation, the tightening of clinging, the soft letting go of desire. The idea that we should pay attention to everything also leads to a subtle but dangerous form of inner pressure. Practitioners may feel they are failing if their awareness slips for even a moment. They become tense, hypervigilant, trying to catch every thought, every feeling, every micromovement. But this is not mindfulness. It is anxiety cloaked in spiritual language. True mindfulness does not strain. It does not try to capture every moment like a surveillance camera. It simply abides with what is relevant, what is real, and what is here. It rests naturally in presence without needing to grasp the entire field of experience. Ironically, the more we try to attend to everything, the more we scatter the mind. Attention, when divided, loses its strength. Mindfulness, when dispersed, loses its clarity. But when we allow mindfulness to return to what matters, the breath, the body, the feeling, the mind state, then it deepens. It sharpens. It becomes a beam of light rather than a dull glow. And in that focused presence, the hidden truths of impermanence, suffering, and non-self begin to reveal themselves. The modern interpretation of mindfulness as bare awareness is a well-intentioned simplification. It offers an accessible starting point, especially for people suffering from stress, anxiety, or disconnection. But if we remain at this surface level, we risk mistaking the doorway for the path. Mindfulness in Buddhism is not just about stress reduction or emotional regulation. It is about awakening. It is about seeing through the illusions that bind us to suffering. And this requires more than attention. It requires right attention. As we move forward in this lecture, we will continue to explore what mindfulness truly is, not as an abstract concept, but as a living practice that cuts through confusion and reveals freedom. But first, we must be willing to release our clinging to popular definitions. We must ask, what kind of attention leads to awakening? What kind of awareness sees through craving? What does it really mean to be mindful, not in the eyes of the world, but in the footsteps of the Buddha? That journey begins by letting go of the idea that mindfulness is about paying attention to everything. It is, instead, the art of paying attention to the right thing at the right time with the right view. It is not the fullness of the moment that matters, but the fullness of presence we bring to what is essential. Mindfulness is not scattered, it is still. Not broad, it is deep. Not passive, it is wise. And it is only from this place that the path of liberation begins to unfold. To understand mindfulness as the Buddha intended, we must turn to the root, the original Pali word Sati, which is often translated into English as mindfulness. However, this translation, while widely accepted, does not fully capture the depth, direction, and function of the term in its canonical usage. In modern contexts, mindfulness is described as a kind of neutral present moment awareness, a non-judgmental attention to whatever arises. But in the early texts of Theravada Buddhism, Sati is anything but neutral or passive. It is dynamic, purposeful, and always in service of the greater path to liberation. The word Sati comes from the Pali root sarati, which means to remember. Thus, at its most literal level, Sati means recollection or remembrance. But what is being remembered? Not the past, not memories in the ordinary sense, but rather the present reality in light of the Dhamma. It is the remembering of what matters in this very moment. It is the bringing to mind of the truth, the teachings, the principles of clarity that guard the mind against confusion and delusion. In this way, Sati is not just being present. It is being present in the right way, with the Dhamma in one's heart and the goal of awakening always in sight. This understanding of Sati as recollection is supported throughout the Pali Canon. In the Satipatthāna Sutta, the Buddha describes the cultivation of mindfulness as the direct path to purification, to overcoming sorrow and lamentation, to the end of suffering and discontent, to the attainment of the right path and the realization of nibbana. These are not small claims. They point to the transformative power of mindfulness when rightly understood and rightly practiced. If mindfulness were merely the act of noticing things as they happen, how could it possibly carry such liberating power? The answer lies in the quality and orientation of the mindfulness the Buddha taught. Sati is inseparable from its companions on the path. It does not stand alone. It is part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which consists of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. In this structure, right mindfulness is not an isolated technique, but a living practice integrated with ethical conduct, mental cultivation, and wisdom. This integration is critical. Without right view, mindfulness becomes aimless. Without right effort, mindfulness becomes weak. Without right concentration, mindfulness becomes scattered. And without wisdom, mindfulness becomes a tool for observing samsara rather than escaping it. In this light, mindfulness cannot be reduced to bare attention. It must be informed by clear comprehension, another key term in the Pali Canon that always appears alongside sati in serious meditative contexts. Sampajaññā means knowing what one is doing, why one is doing it, whether it is appropriate, and whether it leads to the goal of freedom. It is the presence of wisdom in the act of being present. Without it, mindfulness becomes mechanical. Being aware of the sensations in the sole of the foot. This is often described as mindfulness of walking. But in the Pali texts, mindfulness of walking is always coupled with clear comprehension. The practitioner knows the purpose of the walking, knows whether the mind is focused or distracted, knows whether the activity is conducive to awakening. This is not robotic observation. It is living wisdom in action. The body is not simply being watched. It is being understood as impermanent, as not self, as part of the conditioned field. This understanding does not arise automatically. It arises through the combination of sati and sampajaññā. Another important dimension of sati is that it functions as a guardian of the mind. In the canonical similes, sati is like a gatekeeper at the door of a fortress. The gatekeeper does not observe everything happening in the city. He watches the entrance, letting in only what is wholesome and keeping out what is harmful. This is a powerful image. It shows that sati is not about becoming aware of all things, but about protecting the mind by remembering the Dhamma and filtering experience through the lens of clarity. When mindfulness is strong, unwholesome states like greed, hatred, and delusion find no entry. When mindfulness weakens, the mind becomes vulnerable to all forms of suffering. This gatekeeping function is supported by the close relationship between sati and right effort. Right effort involves preventing the arising of unwholesome mental states, abandoning those that have already arisen, cultivating wholesome states not yet arisen, and maintaining those already present. Mindfulness is what allows us to know what is arising in the mind so that the right effort can be applied. Without mindfulness, there is no awareness of what needs to be abandoned or developed. Without mindfulness, right effort becomes blind. In this way, sati is the central monitoring faculty that enables the entire spiritual path to function. Sati also plays a crucial role in memory and continuity of purpose. In the flow of daily life, and even within a meditation session, it is easy to forget our intention. The mind wanders. Distractions arise, habits take over. Sati brings us back. It remembers, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? What is the goal? This remembering is not cognitive recollection, but a deep alignment with one's spiritual compass. It is the mental factor that stabilizes attention, reorients effort, and preserves clarity. In this sense, sati is like a thread that holds the whole tapestry of practice together. The Buddha frequently praised mindfulness as the forerunner of all skillful states. In the Dhammapada, he declares, mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The mindful do not die. The heedless are as if dead already. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a radical statement of spiritual truth. The deathless, nibbana, is not reached through vague awareness or passive observation. It is reached through vigilant mindfulness, rooted in wisdom, energized by effort, and directed by view. Sati is the quality that keeps the practitioner on track, that illuminates the unfolding of conditionality in real time, that allows craving to be seen and released. In summary, Sati in the Pāli Canon is a multifaceted mental quality. It is recollection, awareness, protection, discernment, and continuity. It is the presence of the Dhamma in the mind. It is the faculty that guards the heart, sharpens the view, and steadies the path. It is not watching everything. It is remembering the one thing that matters, the truth of suffering and the path that leads beyond it. When rightly cultivated, Sati becomes a mirror in which the true nature of reality is seen clearly: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. And in that seeing, the roots of ignorance begin to loosen. The mind begins to quiet. The world begins to open. And what remains is not just awareness. It is wisdom, peace, and freedom. To fully understand how mindfulness functions within the original teachings of the Buddha, one must look deeply into the heart of its application. The Satipatthhāna, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. These four foundations are not philosophical abstractions. They are a systematic training, a precise and direct path that the Buddha himself called Ekayano Mago, the one and only way, for the purification of beings, the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, the disappearance of pain and grief, the attainment of the right method, and the realization of nibbana. Such powerful words are not to be taken lightly. They signal that the Satipatthhāna is not merely a meditation technique, but a radical framework for total transformation. It is the blueprint for insight, liberation, and awakening, not by intellectual knowledge, but by the direct observation of experience. The structure of Satipatthhāna divides mindfulness into four primary domains: the body, feelings, mind, and mental objects or phenomena. These are not isolated areas of attention, but interwoven aspects of lived experience. They function together as a training ground where the practitioner learns to look deeply, not just to see what is present, but to understand its nature, its arising, its passing, and its conditionality. Mindfulness in this context becomes not an act of noticing, but an act of knowing in a way that liberates. The first foundation, mindfulness of the body, is where the training begins. This is not because the body is more important than the mind, but because the body is more accessible, more concrete, and less elusive. In this foundation, one cultivates mindfulness through awareness of breathing, postures, bodily movements, anatomical parts, and even the decay of the corpse. Each of these contemplations serves a function: to deconstruct the illusion of solidity, permanence, and beauty that the mind projects onto the body. For example, breathing is not just a calming exercise. It is a doorway into the impermanence and non-control of the body. You breathe in, and the body rises. You breathe out, and it falls. You cannot hold on to the breath. You cannot stop it from changing. This simple observation, when deeply seen, becomes a revelation. It reveals the truth of anicca, impermanence. When mindfulness is directed toward bodily postures, walking, sitting, standing, lying down, it breaks the unconscious stream of automatic behavior. You begin to see how often the body moves without awareness, driven by habit and restlessness. But when you walk with mindfulness, when you sit with mindfulness, a different quality arises: steadiness, clarity, and presence. You are no longer drifting in time. You are rooted in the immediacy of form. The body becomes a temple, not of worship, but of observation. And in observing, the illusion of ownership starts to dissolve. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not myself. These are not ideas to believe. They are truths to discover. The second foundation, mindfulness of feelings, leads the practitioner into subtler territory. Here, one observes the quality of each experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This foundation is deceptively simple. One might think it means merely labeling sensations. But what is truly being observed is the mind's reaction to feeling. Every feeling, no matter how small, contains the seed of craving or aversion. A pleasant feeling gives rise to desire. An unpleasant feeling gives rise to resistance. A neutral feeling gives rise to ignorance or dullness. When mindfulness becomes sharp and continuous, these movements can be seen not as personal choices, but as conditioned responses. You begin to understand that the mind is not choosing to crave, it is reacting automatically. And in this understanding, the automaticity can begin to unravel. You watch a pleasant sensation arise, feel the pull of craving begin, and, through mindfulness, you step out of the chain. You do not follow. You see, you understand, and you let it pass. This is the breaking of the cycle. This is liberation in action. The third foundation, mindfulness of mind, is the turning of attention inward toward the states of consciousness themselves. Here, one observes whether the mind is with lust or without lust, with hatred or without hatred, distracted or concentrated, contracted or expanded. This foundation requires greater sensitivity, because the mind observing the mind can easily become entangled in judgment, confusion, or identification. But as mindfulness deepens, a separation emerges, not the separation of dissociation, but the clear space of observation. You begin to recognize moods and mental states not as who you are, but as passing visitors. You are angry, and then you see. There is anger. The shift is subtle, but profound. Anger no longer defines the self. It becomes an object of awareness. And when anger is seen without clinging, it loses its power to control. The same is true for joy, sadness, fear, pride, envy, and all the other colors of the mind. You are not your mind. You are the one who knows. The fourth and final foundation, mindfulness of mental phenomena, is the most refined. It involves observing mental patterns, categories, and teachings as they arise in direct experience. This includes the 5 hindrances, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 4 noble truths. At this stage, mindfulness becomes a lens through which the structure of reality is revealed. You do not merely feel greed. You recognize it as a hindrance, a defilement that clouds the mind. You do not merely hear a sound. You observe the process of contact, feeling, craving, clinging, and becoming. The Dhamma is no longer something in books. It is unfolding in the immediacy of the present moment. What makes Satipatthana so powerful is that it does not rely on belief, speculation, or metaphysics. It invites direct observation. It says, see for yourself. Do not believe because I say it. Observe the body. Observe the feelings. Observe the mind. Observe the laws that govern experience. And in that seeing, you will know. This is mindfulness in its truest form, not a vague awareness of general experience, but a precise engagement with the forces that create suffering and the path that ends it. The 4 foundations are not 4 different techniques, but 4 lenses through which the same reality is viewed. They support each other, deepen each other, and guide the practitioner toward ever greater clarity. At first, mindfulness may seem difficult, like learning a new language. But as it develops, it becomes natural, steady, and penetrating. The breath becomes a teacher. A pain in the leg becomes a revelation. A thought of anger becomes an opportunity. Everything becomes material for insight, because everything is part of the path. Importantly, mindfulness in the context of Satipatthana is never passive. It is investigative, energetic, and always aligned with the goal of liberation. The practitioner is instructed to be ardent, clearly comprehending, and mindful. This ardency, atapi in Pali, is the fire of effort, the commitment to truth, the refusal to drift. When combined with clear comprehension and mindfulness, it creates a triangle of power that cuts through delusion like a blade. In the modern world, mindfulness is often practiced as relaxation. In the Buddha's world, mindfulness was practiced as a revolution against ignorance, craving, and the tyranny of the conditioned mind. The 4 foundations are the training ground for that revolution. They are the place where mindfulness comes alive, not as a tool for tranquility alone, but as a torch for truth. Through them, one learns not to pay attention to everything, but to awaken to what truly is. There is a quiet but powerful misconception that often accompanies the word mindfulness, especially as it has become mainstream in modern society. Mindfulness is not a mental security camera scanning the environment for intrusions. It is not a detached awareness that quietly catalogs sounds, thoughts, and feelings like a librarian sorting books. Instead, true mindfulness is a form of awakening. It is a knowing that reveals. It is a brightness of the mind that cuts through fog. It is a moment-to-moment illumination of what is, not just in its appearance, but in its nature. To understand this fully, one must see that mindfulness is not merely a capacity to notice experience. It is a function of wisdom. When mindfulness arises in its proper place within the Noble Eightfold Path, it does so with the support of right view, and it moves in harmony with right effort and right concentration. It is not adrift. It is not rootless. It is aligned with a purpose, the cessation of suffering. In that purpose, mindfulness becomes more than just presence. It becomes wakefulness. It awakens the mind from its sleepwalking. It reveals the habitual currents that carry us unconsciously. It shines a light on craving, clinging, and the subtle belief in a permanent self. This is why the Buddha did not use the word sati to describe a passive observer, but rather one who remembers the Dhamma, one who knows the proper purpose of each moment, one who does not forget the task of liberation. Modern interpretations of mindfulness often fall into the trap of neutrality. Just observe, the practitioner is told. Just watch without interference. Let everything be. While there is value in non-reactivity, mindfulness is not the same as indifference. In fact, mindfulness without clear comprehension can become a kind of spiritual apathy, a way of being present without being truly engaged. But in the early Buddhist texts, mindfulness is always paired with understanding. It is not just knowing that something is happening. It is knowing how and why it is happening, and whether it is leading to bondage or freedom. This is the function of awakening. The mind is no longer a bystander. It is a participant in its own release. Mindfulness that awakens does not need to attend to everything equally. It knows what to attend to. It knows the difference between wholesome and unwholesome, between what leads to clarity and what leads to confusion. This is why mindfulness is not the same as generalized awareness. It is a focused, selective, and intelligent presence. The Buddha never asked us to expand our attention outward without direction. He asked us to bring it inward, to turn it toward the roots of suffering, to examine the movements of the mind that give rise to craving and self-identity. And so, mindfulness becomes a lamp that shines not on the world outside, but on the mind within. A critical component of this inner illumination is the presence of clear comprehension, which the Buddha described as knowing the appropriateness, suitability, and purpose of every action, movement, and thought. Without this, mindfulness can become aimless. One may be aware of the breath, the body, the sounds, and sensations, but still be caught in confusion. But when mindfulness is coupled with clear comprehension, each moment becomes a question. Is this beneficial? Is this rooted in craving? Is this action skillful? This line of inquiry transforms mindfulness from passive monitoring into active wisdom. You are no longer simply present. You are awake in a way that is wise, discerning, and liberating. Mindfulness is also closely connected to the development of insight. In the early texts, mindfulness is never an end in itself. It is a means, a necessary, powerful means, for the cultivation of direct knowledge. It is through mindfulness that we begin to see the arising and passing of all phenomena. We begin to notice how sensations appear, linger, and disappear. We begin to observe how thoughts emerge from conditions and dissolve back into silence. We start to recognize the transient, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of all experience. This is not merely noticing, it is penetrating seeing. And this penetration is what begins to loosen the grip of ignorance. It is here that we see most clearly the difference between monitoring and awakening. Monitoring is horizontal. It moves across the surface of experience. It may cover a wide field, but it does not dig deep. Awakening is vertical. It drills into the heart of experience, piercing the layers of assumption, attachment, and delusion that surround the self. Monitoring says, I am aware that this is happening. Awakening says, I see what this really is, and I am no longer deceived. In this way, mindfulness becomes the vehicle through which ignorance is replaced with wisdom, not by adding more experiences, but by seeing through the illusion that has covered the truth all along. There is also an element of courage in true mindfulness. To awaken is not always pleasant. When the light of mindfulness begins to penetrate our defenses, we often see things we would rather avoid: the pettiness of our desires, the repetitiveness of our anger, the hidden fears and insecurities that drive our choices. But mindfulness does not flinch. It does not turn away. It holds the gaze steady, not with judgment, but with clarity. It allows things to be seen, not to wallow in them, but to understand their impermanent and conditioned nature. And in this understanding, the seeds of transformation are sown. We begin to relate differently to what we once feared. We begin to soften around the parts of ourselves we once resisted. We begin to recognize that no thought or emotion has the power to bind us when seen with full awareness. Importantly, mindfulness as awakening does not mean trying harder to be alert. It is not a forceful effort. It is not about tensing the mind to become more mindful. Rather, it is about learning to rest in a natural, open clarity, one that sees without grasping, hears without chasing, feels without drowning. This clarity is not cultivated through strain, but through trust. Trust in the simplicity of the breath, trust in the rhythm of the body, trust in the unfolding of the moment when we no longer interfere. In this quiet, attentive simplicity, mindfulness deepens. And as it deepens, it awakens. When we understand mindfulness as awakening, we also stop trying to chase experiences. We do not use mindfulness to accumulate more states, more insights, more clarity. Instead, we use it to understand what is already here. We become less interested in chasing after special moments and more interested in waking up to the moment that has already arrived. In that shift, the practitioner stops trying to become someone and starts learning how to stop becoming. This is the essence of the Buddhist path, not the creation of a better self, but the seeing through of the illusion of self altogether. Mindfulness, when practiced with wisdom, does not inflate the ego, it dissolves it. Ultimately, mindfulness as awakening leads to the highest goal of the Buddha's teaching: freedom from suffering, not through suppression, distraction, or avoidance, but through full and fearless knowing. It is the kind of knowing that sees deeply into the fabric of experience and no longer clings to any of it as I or mine. It is the knowing that reveals the body as a process, the mind as a stream, the world as a field of causes and effects, all arising, all passing, all empty of ownership. In that knowing, peace arises, not the peace of numbness, but the peace of release, the peace of no longer being fooled. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of mindfulness, not an endless scanning of the moment, but the awakening to what is true, not the broadening of attention to include everything, but the focusing of attention to see clearly, not a practice of mental performance, but a practice of inner freedom. And in this way, mindfulness ceases to be a method, it becomes a way of being, a way of knowing, a way of living that is rooted not in fear or striving, but in truth. When mindfulness is rightly understood, rightly cultivated, and rightly directed, it does not end in calmness, clarity, or even insight alone. These are milestones, not destinations. The true fruit of mindfulness is liberation, a profound inner freedom from the chains of craving, ignorance, and the delusion of selfhood. This liberation is not theoretical. It is not a future reward offered in return for moral behavior or spiritual effort. It is a real, experiential release that occurs in this very life, in this very mind, when the conditions are right and the seeing is deep enough. And mindfulness, when aligned with wisdom and rooted in the Dhamma, is the condition that makes such release possible. In the Pali Canon, mindfulness is not praised for its own sake. It is praised because of what it does, because of the direction it moves in, and because of the awakening it enables. The Buddha did not teach Sati as a generic skill. He taught it as a liberating force, a torch that lights the way out of samsara. Without mindfulness, the practitioner is blind, drifting from moment to moment, driven by habit and unconscious reaction. But with mindfulness, the light is turned on. The mechanics of suffering can be seen, not as abstract doctrines, but as lived, immediate truth. And once something is seen clearly, its power begins to dissolve. The first taste of this freedom often comes not through grand revelation, but through the simple act of non-clinging. One is meditating, a thought arises, perhaps a memory, a plan, or a judgment, and instead of following it, one sees it clearly and lets it go. In that moment, something shifts. The thought loses its weight. The self that was wrapped in it loosens. There is space. There is ease. This is not the final freedom, but it is the beginning of the end of bondage. It is the crack in the wall that lets the first rays of light enter. As mindfulness deepens, this capacity to let go becomes more refined. The practitioner begins to observe how craving arises not only in obvious ways, such as desire for pleasure or aversion to pain, but also in subtle, nearly invisible movements of the mind. The desire to be understood, the desire to improve, the desire to maintain control, the desire to hold on to even the meditative experience itself. But with mindfulness, these impulses are no longer hidden. They are exposed in the light of awareness. One sees them as impermanent, conditioned, and empty. And in this seeing, one does not have to suppress them. One simply stops feeding them. The fire of craving burns itself out, not through force, but through understanding. This is the genius of the Buddha's path. It does not fight defilements directly. It understands them. And this understanding is made possible by mindfulness. With sustained mindfulness, the practitioner begins to trace the causal chain of suffering. How contact gives rise to feeling. How feeling gives rise to craving. How craving gives rise to clinging. How clinging leads to becoming. And so on. This chain, known as paññā or dependent origination, is the secret engine of samsara. And it is mindfulness that allows the gears of this engine to be seen. It is mindfulness that allows the practitioner to interrupt the process, not by breaking it with effort, but by ceasing to participate in it unconsciously. At the heart of liberation is the direct seeing of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, the three characteristics of existence. Impermanence reveals that nothing can be held. Suffering reveals that nothing can truly satisfy. Non-self reveals that nothing can be possessed as I or mine. These are not beliefs to be adopted, but truths to be known directly, repeatedly, and intimately. Mindfulness, sustained and supported by right concentration and right effort, is what enables this knowing. It is what turns the gaze inward and dissolves the false solidity of the world. When the body is seen as process, when feelings are seen as waves, when thoughts are seen as echoes, the mind stops clinging. And when clinging ends, freedom begins. This freedom is not a blissful trance, nor is it a state of emotional detachment. It is not about rising above life, but about being fully with life without being caught by it. The liberated mind can feel pain, but it does not suffer. It can experience joy, but it does not crave it. It can act in the world, love in the world, serve in the world, without being owned by the world. This is the meaning of true freedom, not the absence of experience, but the absence of enslavement to experience. Mindfulness cultivates this freedom not through external control, but through internal clarity. When the mind sees clearly, it no longer grasps. When it no longer grasps, it no longer spins. And when it no longer spins, it rests, not in indifference, but in peace. This peace is not fragile. It is not dependent on conditions. It is not shaken by praise or blame, gain or loss, pleasure or pain. It is the unshakable peace of the one who knows. All that arises passes away. There is nothing to cling to. There is nothing to fear. The texts describe this freedom with a powerful image, vimutti, release. It is like a bird set free from a cage. It is like a flame that is no longer fueled. It is the natural state of the mind when all defilements have been understood, seen through, and let go. And mindfulness is the quiet hand that opens the door of the cage, the clear eye that stops pouring fuel on the fire. The Buddha described nibbana not as a place, but as a cessation, the cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. Mindfulness leads there not by rejecting the world, but by seeing it rightly. When the world is seen rightly, it no longer holds. It no longer deceives. It no longer binds. This is why mindfulness must be understood as a liberating faculty. It is not a wellness trend. It is not a tool for productivity. It is not a technique for improving mood or reducing stress, though it may do all of these as side effects. At its core, it is a radical path to the end of suffering. It is a rebellion against ignorance. It is the gradual awakening of a mind that has slept too long in the dream of me and mine. It is the beginning of the end of becoming. And yet, this liberation is not distant. It is not reserved for saints or monastics. The Buddha made it clear. This path is open to all who walk it with sincerity, energy, and discernment. The first fruits of freedom can be tasted even in lay life, even in the midst of responsibilities, relationships, and routines. All that is required is the willingness to see, to be present, to stop running. And mindfulness is the ground on which this willingness is cultivated, moment by moment, breath by breath. The journey of mindfulness is not linear. There are days of clarity and days of fog, moments of joy and moments of resistance. But through it all, the practice teaches us how to stay, how to see, how to let go. And each time we return to the breath, each time we return to the body, each time we return to the present with full awareness, we take one step further out of the forest of confusion and into the clearing of understanding. This is how mindfulness liberates, not in a flash of magic, but in the patient fire of presence. So let it be known clearly, mindfulness is not about watching everything. It is about waking up to what is. And what is not a random parade of sensations, but the unfolding truth of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. To see that truth again and again is to loosen the grip of delusion. And when that grip is finally broken, the mind stands free, silent, unshaken, alive. We have traveled far across the terrain of mindfulness, from the popular misconceptions that shape its image in the modern world, to the depth and clarity with which it is presented in the early Pāli Canon. And now, as we arrive at the conclusion of this exploration, we are left with a question that must echo deeply in the heart. What does it truly mean to live with mindfulness? Not as a trend, not as a technique, but as a path to awakening. It is clear now that mindfulness is not simply about paying attention. It is not about scanning the present moment like a passive observer, nor is it about embracing every sensation with non-judgmental awareness. These modern definitions, though well-meaning and sometimes helpful in the context of stress reduction, fall short of the transformative force that Sati represents in the Buddha's path. Mindfulness, as taught by the Buddha, is the intentional recollection of what matters, the unwavering attention to what liberates, and the refusal to be swept away by the illusions of permanence, satisfaction, and selfhood. This is not a small thing. This is not a matter of mental hygiene or emotional regulation. This is a matter of freedom, of seeing the mind clearly enough that the fire of craving burns out, and the ground of being is no longer shaken by gain or loss, fame or blame, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. This is what mindfulness leads to, not the perfection of experience, but the release from needing experience to be perfect. The modern world, with all its distractions and pressures, would have us believe that mindfulness is something to sprinkle into life like a seasoning, to enhance productivity, reduce stress, improve relationships. And while mindfulness can indeed support those things, its true power is far more radical. It is the power to wake up from the dream of becoming. It is the power to recognize the deep patterns of identification and to stop feeding them. It is the power to step out of the prison of I, me, mine, and into the vast, unbounded space of not mine. Not I, not myself. But such liberation is not achieved through intellectual understanding or momentary glimpses. It is achieved through consistent, sustained, and wise attention, through the kind of mindfulness that is saturated with discernment, rooted in ethics, and guided by right view. It is the kind of mindfulness that does not just notice pain, it understands its cause and ends it, that does not just observe thought, it sees the emptiness of the one who thinks, that does not just follow the breath, but uses the breath as a vehicle into the depths of impermanence and non-clinging. This kind of mindfulness is not reserved for saints or sages. It is available to anyone who dares to look inward with sincerity and courage. Anyone who is willing to stay when the mind wants to run. Anyone who is willing to see things as they truly are, without decoration or denial. The breath is always here. The body is always here. The mind is always displaying itself. The Dhamma is not hidden. What is required is not belief, but the willingness to see, the willingness to remember, the willingness to let go. And this letting go is not a rejection of life. It is a return to life in its most intimate form. A life not driven by becoming, but illuminated by being. A life not tangled in self-concepts, but resting in presence. A life that understands birth and death not as distant events, but as processes unfolding in each moment, each arising and passing of sensation, thought, emotion, perception. Mindfulness reveals this. And in revealing this, it transforms not what is seen, but the one who sees. The Buddha compared mindfulness to a light that dispels darkness, a gatekeeper that protects the fortress, a mirror that reflects accurately. But most of all, mindfulness is the soil in which wisdom grows. Without it, the seeds of understanding cannot take root. With it, even the most ordinary moment becomes sacred. Washing the dishes, walking to the store. But to see it clearly, not to stop thinking, but to stop identifying with every thought. Not to avoid pain, but to meet it without the extra weight of resistance. Not to seek constant pleasure, but to find peace in the midst of change. This is the real gift of mindfulness. It does not fix the world. It frees us from needing the world to be fixed. We often look for peace outside of ourselves. In quiet places, in success, in relationships, in security. But the Buddha turned the search inward. He pointed not to a place, but to a way of seeing, a way of being. A way of living with such radical presence that even suffering loses its sting. That way is mindfulness. Not ordinary mindfulness, not diluted mindfulness, but the kind that sees the conditioned as conditioned, the impermanent as impermanent, the not-self as not-self. The kind of mindfulness that doesn't grasp or push away, but simply knows, and in knowing is free. And so, we conclude not with a technique, but with a truth. That mindfulness is not about watching everything. It is about waking up to the one thing that matters. The truth of this moment, seen clearly, without clinging. Because when this moment is known without illusion, the entire structure of suffering begins to crumble. What remains is not a better version of the self, but the absence of self, and in that absence, an immeasurable peace. May your mindfulness be not wide, but deep. Not tense, but luminous. Not scattered, but wise. May it lead you not merely to calm, but to the end of becoming, to the end of suffering, to the vast, silent, unfabricated freedom that was never far away, only unseen. This is the heart of mindfulness in the Pali tradition. This is the awakening the Buddha pointed to, and it is available to you now, right here, in this breath.